I think we're going to get going. My name is Rison. I'm the editor of Sightlines, and I'm delighted to see everybody here tonight to join us in a conversation and to listen to what artists and cultural leaders have to say to us tonight. I'm incredibly grateful for the Carver Museum and Panelists and Carrie and all of the staff here for agreeing to collaborate with us on this program, and we couldn't be more delighted to partner and work with them. I'd also like to thank Big Medium too, who is and when I say we, I mean me and Sightlines and Big Medium collaborating together on this program. We thought, with everything that's going on and with East Austin Studio Tour being in process right now, and the Carver Museum is a stop here on the East Austin Studio Tour. We've got some lovely exhibits to see. That was the time to have a conversation about important topics that are affecting and on our minds for all of us. And now is the time for us to listen to what people have to say. So, Panelists is going to say hello.
Good evening. I am glad that you're clapping now because maybe you won't after I get through. But thank you so very much. Good evening. One more time. Good evening. All right, we need to have a call and response. You know, I grew up in a loud Baptist church in Galveston County, and when the minister got up to speak, and issued forth a call, there had to be a response because we are a participatory people, and it is with that energy and that sense of engagement that we can count on this topic tonight. And so that's why I say good evening, and I'm expecting a good response because it's a good evening. You're in the house of Carver. It's a good evening.
Not the Lord.
It's a good evening. It's a good evening because you're all smiling. It is a good evening because we have some stellar panelists with us today. It is a good evening because it is not often or not always that a community will engage in the subject that we have today. Artists respond. Considering place and culture. You know, when we think about culture, we can either use culture as a bridge or we can use culture as a barrier. Which one do we wish to use? That's the question that faces all of us. And so I say that museums, ideally, and I know all museums are not ideal, but Carver is ideal. And so museums should do at least two things. That is to understand and to teach and explore the ways in which we are all similar as human beings. But it also has a much more, an equally important mission, and that is to appreciate the ways in which we are different. And so with that said, let me just, give me a microphone because I don't have one literally. I will sit up and give advertisements and everything. I am shameless about this, promoting the museum. During East, we have 3 artists that are here. Ariel Austin, Kemi Ese, and Iame Everett. And this exhibition is entitled Color and Form. And so it starts in this exhibition space and moves into our exhibition corridor space. We also have Eto Otitikbe, who is a Nigerian American who grew up here, who was born and raised here, Nigerian parents, but he is a person who is a very gifted artist, an artist with a voice, and we have Subways, his exhibition here. But Otitikbe is unique among many artists because he is not only a visual artist, he is also an engineer. So before you leave this evening, while you are in the house of Carver, thank you. While you're in the house of Carver, please see these exhibitions because it's an important part of our offerings to East Austin Studio Tours. And with that said, I will be quiet and who do I end this mic? Thank you so much.
All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming out. Again, thank you to Big Medium and the Carver for making this possible. All right, that's a little bit better. All right, my name is Anthony García. I'm a multidisciplinary artist and independent curator based here in Austin. I'm going to be our moderator for the evening, and so I just want to do some introductions of our panelists we have here today. So here to my right, Nefertitti Jackmon. She is the executive director of Six Square, Austin's Black Cultural District. Nefertitti Jackmon moved to Austin from Houston in 2017 to take up the executive directorship of Six Square. She has more than 2 decades of experience working at community-based organizations which cultivate, preserve, and promote African American culture, including Houston's Emancipation Park Conservancy. She is also currently serving as the director, co-chair of the City of Austin's Anti-Displacement Task Force. I think it's right.
Just needed.
All right, and to her right, oh, I just realized I read the wrong line. Is that all right?
That's okay.
That was the ones I had prepared. Okay, and then to her right, we have Cindy Elizabeth. Cindy was born and raised in East Austin, Texas, where she currently resides and makes art. Cindy attended Baylor University, where she received her BBA in Human Resource Management in 2010. Photography has always been a passion of hers, a gift inherited from her late mother. Cindy's work centers around the Black experience, exploring the beauty and struggle and liberation of the stories of all African Americans. Cindy works with multiple mediums, photography, mixed media, digital media, sound, and video. Cindy is currently the 2017 Artist in Residence at Algo, and her work has been shown in the Work Gallery, the George Washington Carver Museum in Austin, Texas, and she is currently has work on permanent display at Russell Lee Elementary. All right, and last but not least, we have Fidencio Duran. Fidencio tells visual stories that honor the history of his family and community. He's inspired by stories his father told about immigrating from Mexico, living and working as a tenant farmer, and those that teach a moral lesson. His paintings, drawings, and prints, based on memories of being part of a large family in rural central Texas, appear in private and public collections in the U.S. and abroad. They have been exhibited by institutions from the National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago, Illinois, to the Smithsonian Latino Center, Fundación OSDE in Buenos Aires, Argentina. His experiences as an artist in education with the Texas Commission on the Arts led to his work as a public muralist. One of his most prominent works, The Visit, graces the length of the West ticket counter at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. The narrative works he started in his early 20s made him the only artist to receive all 3 Dallas Museum of Art awards to artists, and his narratives have told the stories of many communities and regions. He has a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the UT Austin, and he didn't put this on here, but I was earlier this year honored to be able to present him an award at the Mexican American Cultural Center, an award of excellence. So just wanted to throw that in. All right, so this topic. A bit weighty, but we're going to do the best we can to get through this without making anyone too upset. Or maybe not. All right, so my first question is going to be to our 2 visual artists. Your works, either directly or indirectly, are part of a larger conversation about gentrification and the history of segregation in Austin or Central Texas. Cindy's by directly responding to the effects of it, and Fidencio by telling the histories of communities that existed here. Can both of you please take your time in elaborating a bit about the context of your work within that narrative?
I'll go ahead and start. The murals that have been described are at the Zaragoza Recreation Center, and then also at the ACC Riverside campus in the El Centro. Those are the 2 most prominent murals that I've done that represent a span of history for different communities here in East Austin. The Zaragoza neighborhood, some of you may know, was basically formed around what was known as Mexican Park. Certainly, apparently in the 1920s, and even before then, it was a gathering place for different people, but it was designated as Mexican Park in 1929, and later became established as Parque Zaragoza. And the murals that I painted in the interior in 1996 show the way that the community developed, the officers of that committee and their contributions. It describes, for example, the work that they did within their community and how different elements in the community helped sustain it during the 1930s through the 40s and on to the present day, actually, when it was established in the mid-1980s. The other mural that I can think of right off is more recent. It's at the ACC Riverside campus, part of El Centro, and it has to do specifically with education because it is, of course, part of ACC Riverside. My idea was to chronicle the role and history of education in the Mexican-American communities, but specific to East Austin, the Riverside community, the Go Valley, Montopolis, and the Del Valley neighborhoods. What I did was I researched through most of the libraries and spoke to different people and got a general sense of how the schools developed, which were the first schools, but I also tried to show some of the social events that were happening at the time. For example, the idea of segregation, and then later integration, and some of the ways that the early schools were actually started in downtown Austin, which was information to me that were actually privately run. Some of the first schools for Mexicans were actually run by the Baptist Church actually, and this private family, the Garfield family. The brother and sister that ran a school down on 4th Street by Shoal Creek. So that is how I have incorporated the history of these neighborhoods into my murals. I've been familiar with East Austin for a long time. I grew up in Lockhart. I went to school in Lockhart and would come through Austin, through 7th Street actually to get to downtown for different reasons. But I've always been familiar with East Austin, with Montopolis, and of course the Catholic Church for certain events. But that's been my association with East Austin. I started painting murals in East Austin actually in the mid-1980s with the Laguna Gloria, part of their outreach program. I worked with mostly Zaragoza Park with kids to do painting murals and things like that. So that's been my association so far with East Austin. But maybe Cindy would like to add to that?
Well, as someone I was born at Breckenridge and was raised here in East Austin with my family who came to Austin from the country, from towns that are so small that you can't even really call them the country. Like my mother claimed Navasota as her hometown, but she was actually from like a little small countryside outside of Navasota. And they each moved here once they graduated from high school. Their siblings followed them. And my dad was from Courtney, Texas. And so when they got here to Austin, the only place where they could move to, and at this time, it wasn't even a matter of affordability, but a matter of where you're allowed to exist. So they met in East Austin. All of my siblings we were raised here in East Austin. My father, his home was across the street from Houston Tillotson, and my mother, her home was Airport and MLK area. And so my experiences in Austin were greatly shaped by those two areas. One being heavily African American, and the other being heavily like residents were of Mexican descent, and so that shaped and informed the way that I engage with my artwork, because I seek to tell the story and to tell the stories of life around me, of life that was here when I was a child, life that's still here in my adulthood. And I began telling stories visually through photography from a young age, before I even really knew that it was photography. I had disposable cameras all of the time, and that's what I was known for in middle school. High school, I think I upgraded to a point and shoot camera, but I've always been a storyteller through my photography and through the work that I do. And it wasn't until I was in my early 20s, after I graduated from Baylor, that I realized that I decided that I could call myself an artist. Because in the world around me, whenever we talked about art and artistry, I didn't see myself, and I didn't see my peers underneath those labels. And so what I strive to do now with my art is to show everyone that we're here, particularly in East Austin, that we're here, that Black artists are here, brown artists are here, and that we need to be more part of the conversation, that our existence should be honored and our existence should be respected as much as the existence of other artists who are around.
That's great.
Am I answering?
Just kind of extended that a little bit for you too. No, I'll get to you, I'm sorry.
I saw the question.
So in terms of your interactions with other artists, doing similar work to yourselves or within that community, who have remained in the city, who haven't been forced out, would you say that there is anything in the nature of their work that connects it to your own? And this could be for either of you or
my work? Well, you know, like I said, I grew up around Austin. I grew up in Lockhart, in Maxwell, and so I was very familiar with the murals of Raul Valdez at the Lincoln Juarez School. In fact, I remember several field trips that we took to Austin and seeing it as we drove down the freeway. And I thought that was pretty fascinating. I thought it was very fascinating. My art teacher had gone to UT Austin, and she was very enthusiastic about a lot of different art forms. We were exposed to a lot of different things, and we'd come to Austin to go to the Harry Ransom Center to look at their art collection, the modern art collection. So I thought that was very exciting, and so Austin has always been, and aside from that, I mean, I have to give credit and acknowledgement to the Armadillo World Headquarters, which everybody knows about. I was a teenager in the late 1970s, and I remember going to the Armadillo World Headquarters, and you know, underage and everything. And so just that whole culture of posters that I saw walking up and down the drag and all over the place, and then people that were my peers or older that came to Austin for concerts. So that whole culture, the culture of art, to me, has always been about Austin. As far as my association with art has always involved Austin. In those ways, when I was in high school, we were fortunate enough to have an arts and education program, and the principal artist lived in Austin, and he brought in real or living artists to go to the schools and to give demonstrations, or just to show that artists do exist and that they can actually make a living as such. So I've seen a lot of things because of Austin in terms of the art. Now, it's in reference to that, my work took a slightly different perspective in reference to Chicano and Mexican American art. because a lot of the murals that were here and in other parts of the country really were more about the kind of, in my view, fairly generic, and I don't mean that to slight it in any way, but it was about very general social movements. It was very much about the idea of Aslan, references to Mesoamerica, pre-Columbian culture. There was references, of course, to the farm workers, which were very significant developments in terms of social history specific to Mexican Americans and to everybody. And I had seen that, and so when I did the murals about Zaragoza, I wanted it to be as specific as possible about those communities. And so therefore I went to the extent of meeting the people, getting to know about their individual stories, how they actually, as I said, how they actually supported themselves and their community and the way that the community developed. And to me, that was something that was very much lacking. I couldn't read about it anywhere really until I went and met these people. And I have to give them the credit, the advisory committee, for actually making sure that that's what the mural was about. I had a general idea of what I wanted to do, and they covered all those basic themes, but I didn't have the specifics. So I guess in a way, that mural, specific to that mural, in a way I was a journalist because I went in there and tried to find out more about the communities that I would not have otherwise known. And I guess because of my personality, my willingness to listen to people, and having grown up in a large family of 10, where I'm the third youngest, and there's always, well, from what I remember, there's a lot of stories being told about our own family history, and so it was very much, I guess, part of my culture to listen to the stories of the elders and people that came before me, and to have, I guess, a sense of respect, if not interest in it at least. So that was my approach to making, in reference to the other murals that existed before then.
Great, thank you. Cindy, how about you?
I would just say that as far as noticing how my work kind of reflects the same things in the work of my peers, I would say that a lot of my peers have become it's more about the storytelling, and there's a lot of preservation of history, in addition to the celebration of culture, which has always been a thing. And the art that I was exposed to, the local art that I was exposed to here in Austin. A lot of my peers now not only do that, but have become seekers of the preservation of history and the preservation of our stories and our essence. And the art speaks to a lot to like claiming space and what it looks like to claim space and imagining what that looks like. And I see a lot of that in the work of my peers.
Definitely, no, I certainly agree. I think that work is a natural response to the issue of erasure. Recording history so that you will not be forgotten. And this question is probably for you. And what other ways do or should place and culture affect the work done by artists and cultural organizations?
Well, it sort of goes back to some of the last things that Cindy just said in terms of claiming space. And one of the things that I have learned in my short time being here in Austin, working on the preservation and celebration of African American culture, is the greatest challenge to cultural production, which includes visual arts and all types of art forms, is the lack of space. That is the greatest inhibitor of the community being able to participate in cultural production. So I believe that culture happens or is produced authentically as people live and go about their lives on a daily basis. So some of the things that are easy to think about, we think about visual arts, right? But culture is more than that. It's how people worship. It's how people engage with one another in very organic ways. Like, I don't know if you've ever been to New York City and been in places, whether it's Brooklyn or Harlem, and there's just a vibrancy of activity, and sometimes a party will break out. You're like, there's nothing going on. Or even in New Orleans. And so there's certain places where people, and it's about where people can gather. Where people gather, culture is being produced. And I think the challenge in Austin, and particularly for the Black community, it has been the lack of space. And I just presented the other night on the fact that there has been a consistent fight for space for Black communities in East Austin. You can go back to Houston Tillotson University, and not Houston Tillotson University, but them too, but the baseball field, right, Downs Field, which was purchased by 9 former enslaved persons. They were working for the Freedmen's Bureau, or had been, right? So they purchased that space in an effort to have a space for the baseball team. But then you could talk about the Carver Library, which is now the Genealogy Center, which was initially Austin's first library, but there was no space for the Black people to go to the library. So they couldn't engage in that, but then it was given as a result of them not being able to go to the main library, right? You think about Six Square, which came about as a result of the fight for speaking to the city about the quality of life that was significantly different, right? So there's been, it's hard to create art if you don't have space in which to create with. And if there's a constant fight for that space, and I'm not saying that you can't produce art without it, but it just becomes very challenging to that. And we see that, and then when you don't see visual representations of yourself, right, what does that do to budding artists? And Cindy mentioned that as well, right? So there needs to be, I don't know, but there needs to be a way where our spaces for us to create, and it should not always have to be a fight for space.
I think we can all agree on that. Studio space, even living space in the city is a premium. And this could go to anyone up here, either in relation to your work or maybe work that you've seen in, well, you've been in Austin for a year, but in other cities you've been, have you seen a change in the work of artists over time because of the issues of gentrification or lack of spaces, or have you seen an evolution of work at all?
Well, I can't say that in terms of over time. I've been here almost 2 years, but what I will say, I am happy and excited with the number of, it's a small number, but even for the East Austin Studio Tours, and Clifford reached out to Bombadeli and reached out to Six Square and at least 5 other spaces where they are showcasing Black art, and he sought to connect these in a way to, you know, because East Austin Studio Tours, there's over, 500 and something art studios and spaces that are participating. So we can get, the Black artists can get lost in all of that. So I will say this, I do see some type of vibrancy, and for 5, that sounds like that's such a low number, but the fact that we have even decided to work together and collaborate to try to highlight what we're doing, I hope that that will begin to build a synergy around Black arts, and I've been seeing a lot of art around, I want to say twerk and something, but I don't want to get it wrong, but do you know what I'm talking about? There's a lot of, well, there's been a lot of like paint parties, and I know they're the thing, but they are particular to Black culture and music, and I think it's exciting. Track, that's what I was, track and paint, that's what I was looking for. So, you're right, thank you.
There's a lot more art in town than ever before. I know there's a lot more murals. I mean, every week or so there's murals popping up here and there. And it seems like, kind of ironic because you're talking about a limited amount of space, but yet I see more and more art all the time. I see more and more artist-run spaces, more exhibits, a greater variety of work that's being done, more conceptual work, things that are, temporary. Just because there's so many more people and many more artists in town, I think that they feel like they have to do something. They're not you can't really just wait to have somebody offer you a space to do something. So I think that that's very, very good. I encourage it more and more all the time. I read about all the complaints that people have, but at the same time, like what you're saying, is that there's more energy. There's many more people that are interested in art. I mean, it's very heartening to read in the Austin American Statesman that parents are up in arms because they fear that their kids' fine arts curriculum may be erased or may be impacted. And that hasn't always been the case, even in Austin, Texas. I did most of my artist and education residencies were outside of Austin, Texas, because there was maybe two organizations that actually were in the position to be able to even sponsor an artist and education program. And so most of my work as an artist in education was done in small towns in Texas, in Tyler, the Valley, Level Land, Texarkana, and those kinds of places, because their school districts, even though they were smaller, they, for whatever reason, saw the priority of having an arts and education program. And now, just to read that in the paper and to hear people talking about, like you say, paint parties and things like that are more impromptu, it's very encouraging because that's part of why I was in arts and education, was to get school districts and people just considering art as being significant. Part of your curriculum and how significant it can be for your community as well. So I guess I have to shine a ray of up there, because there's so many people, everybody wants to do the same thing. It's cool to be an artist, it's hip to be an artist. I think it's a lot better than the alternative.
Art as therapy and survival.
Yeah, that's a trend I've noticed as well. Taking your mental health into consideration and using that, especially dealing with, just the overall politics of the country. So this one's a bit of a loaded question, but it's kind of in response to what you were saying as far as space being so rare to come by in the city right now. Do you see artists requiring spaces being on the same level of disparity with people in the city who are also losing their spaces as far as like homes because of gentrification? So that would be, do you think artists realize or understand the relationship between renting a cheap studio space to overcome their issues, resulting in displacement of, usually communities of color? Do you think artists are taking that into consideration, or is that even on their radar? For anybody.
Well, I will definitely say affordability in Austin is a problem that everybody is facing. So it's a challenge, no matter what your profession is. Yeah, I looked at some of your questions and I didn't really know how to answer. I was like, oh gosh, that's a tough one. I'll get back to it. And I never got back to it. But I think I'll just say this. I think we as a city, as city leaders, we have an obligation to provide a way for people of various incomes, and I really feel that this is regardless of your profession, to be able to afford to live here and to do the work that you love. And I'm sure that artists are aware that there are some sacrifices that they will have to make, but it shouldn't be. We have to get rid of this thing that comes with it. I'm a starving artist. I mean, it shouldn't be that difficult. And I think if I heard correctly, and I'm responding to some things that I don't know how much the public knows, we do have to find a way, if we provide affordability for some artists, it has to be for all artists. And I keep getting these emails about new space for creatives, and I did the numbers on some of the space. I mean, one space was like $19 per square foot. Now, okay, so I said, let me try a small space. So I did 800 square foot. Can anyone throw out a number of what that was, what that is, like really quick? Someone who's not like an English major like me, I know what the answer is because I actually tabulated it. It was like $15,000 a month. What? But someone told me that Six Square should look into that. And I was like, who in the world can afford this space, right? And so I think we do, the city has an obligation, but I think it should be three-pronged. I think the city has an obligation. I think our philanthropic dollars should be part of the solution, as well as corporations or developers. We have to work together collectively to find a solution. And I am okay, because that's the work that I do, working with creatives. If art and a diversity of art is going to be something that we value, because it is important on so many levels. So yes, and I think we need to start attacking the problem from many different angles.
I think that I'm not sure that some artists are as aware as they should be of the history of displacement in this city, and kind of the moving pieces to displacement, and everything that has led up to the current time. I don't think there is a great enough amount of understanding for that, because a lot of the artists who are leading those, or at the forefront of those conversations of, affordability, are the folks who can afford the galleries, who can afford to have a gallery to get pushed out of East Austin, It's not any of the artists who are part of the historical communities here in East Austin. And I think the conversation should begin with the acknowledgement of the history of the displacement of people in East Austin, in Austin in general. And that needs to be at the forefront of those conversations, because I think a lot of the solutions that pop up when that's not at the forefront are the affordable art housing for artists, because you're not really considering the artists who have been in the community for generations, the artists whose families have been here for generations,
generations of artists who are struggling to still be here, the artists who've probably already been pushed out. Like, we're not at the forefront of those conversations. We're not at the forefront of any of the decisions that are being made to accommodate artists or art districts or anything of that nature. It's all inaccessible to us. So I think that's an important piece that's often missing from that.
Of course.
Okay. And part of me talking about the fight for space in Austin, right? It's understanding and putting that in a historical context. So you have to go back to see who are the people who have been impacted, right? But you have to most impacted by the displacement. So you have to go back and understand and learn the history. And I think that sometimes we choose not to do that. And sometimes, people say, oh, it's unintentional. But if you choose not to live or learn about the area where you are moving into, you don't want to be accountable, right? So if I don't know something, I can't be accountable. But by learning the history, that means I have to take some different actions, right? And so you always, to me, want to understand who are the most impacted, what is the history of these people, these individuals, and that's one of the reasons why I went back and looked at, so I didn't go through all of them, Downsfield, Rosewood Courts, right, which was formerly Emancipation Park, which was purchased by former slaves, which the city used eminent domain to take over, right? So you have, and then you have to then understand what it does to the voice of the people in the community. If they feel like they can't fight and their fight doesn't make a difference, then they slowly begin to retreat, and you don't see them participating and engaging in things that make a difference in the city.
I agree. I would even add that a lot of artists don't realize or think about the context of getting that cheap studio space and the community that could be affected by it until they are themselves getting gentrified out of their studios. I think that's when it kind of, my light bulb goes off, but then by then it's too late.
If it even does go on.
True. Let's see if we kind of touched on this. I'm going to read a real quick thing from an article from AmericansForTheArts.org. And this is speaking about situations in Baltimore dealing with gentrification. And it goes on with, this starts taking time to develop an understanding of the existing community into which new residents are entering, like you said. It means to begin with getting involved in housing discussions. And I think that's where we're kind of lacking at this point. The residents also wanted to create a space that could both represent and expressly serve the needs of their community, one which otherwise risks further marginalization and eviction. They recognized in seeking to create a Black arts district that art has a strong social power, but that power can only reach its full potential when combined with social awareness. And, as open as artists' minds are, I think sometimes they're maybe too disconnected from the politics of space. And so that's one of my takeaways. All right. And this was a question for you at the beginning. How have you navigated infusing social awareness with the development of Six Square? I mean, I know it's kind of at the core of it, but like, what has been your take on it?
I have two different thoughts. And I'm trying to figure out which way I'm going to go. So I'm going to share with you two thoughts. Okay?
We can handle that.
Okay, all right, thank you. So initially when I got here, I really wanted to stay very focused on this is an arts organization. It's a cultural arts district, which it is. I've seen in Houston There are two organizations, one was sort of birthed out of the other one. The arts organization gets all the funding, it's the darling, everybody loves it. They're thriving, everyone uses them as the model. Whereas the other organization that is tied and connected to the community, social activists in nature, has been around for 60-something years, is struggling for funding. It's loved by the community, but not by funders. So I made up in my mind that Six Square was not going to be focused on social activism. I didn't want that to be our focus. But I have these brilliant discussions and conversations with my dad, and I talk to Reverend Dixon all the time, and he said, well, you know, me and your dad have a lot in common, so that's my other advisor right now, that's my board chair, Reverend Dixon, and my dad said, well, how was your, and before I tell that, we kept putting in applications for funding from certain groups. This is at Six Square. And the feedback I would get was, no, this is too much like Black Lives Matter, da 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 da. And I was puzzled because I'm like, this is a cultural arts organization, I know. But what I realized, anything that is Black, it's almost like it's an affront to white. And I didn't get it. But I got that also. I was working with a communication strategist, and she's like, well, you guys are social justice. I'm like, where do people keep getting this from? Now, but my dad asked me a question. He said, how did you guys get started? And I said, wow, it was as a result of the Quality of Life initiative. That was social activism, regardless of what I wanted to be, and it was in response to city answering a question. So regardless of so in my mind, I said, you know what? And it can be both. Art can be both. And I had to wrestle with that because I'm being very honest, and I hate to be honest when I'm being recorded. And this is what I'm going to embrace. And especially if we're going to be labeled as a social justice organization anyway, then you might as well go all the way and do what you need to do. So with that, to answer that, with the mural at 12th and Chacon, we did get involved. And I would say I was reluctant for that very reason. But one of the things that I really wanted to do, because I hate being reactionary to stuff. I said, if we're going to engage the community, then we're going to find solutions that will help us to be progressive, so that we're not always responding to situations. And so the main thing that I wanted to do is help the community to understand that you have a voice. You have the ability to say something. And there were several murals that had gotten erased, right? But we were glad, and I wish we had done something before to help with the other spaces, but we didn't. So I felt like we gave the community a voice through a series of community conversations. We wanted to hear, what do you want? What is the response? And so that's what I was following, the response of the community. And then Bamadeli gave me something that I really liked. He said that we need to ritualize that space. So some people got tired of talking about 12th and Chacon, the mural at 12th and Chacon, but that was a part of the plan, to ritualize the space so that the community began to have ownership of that space. And so when we have ownership and power over our space, then they will understand that the value, and I said the people who might erase it or get rid of it or whatever, the owners of the space, they can think twice. But we wanted to make sure that the community had voice. And so that's what we hope to do with what we hope will be very intentional programming and giving voice to the community about what this programming and what the art will look like in our community.
Definitely, yeah. I would even add that you're saying that anything black is basically an affront to whiteness. And I would even add on that just any art, or even anything that involves black and brown bodies or queer bodies are inherently political. It just is. It is, just by existence and by saying who you are. So.
Hence the man who got killed, you know.
Do y'all want to add anything to that, or?
I think in general, anytime you present, just as a painter, as an artist, in terms of the history of American art, in contemporary, well, I would say in modern art, the human figure is pretty much absent. I mean, in other words, it's always associated with socialism. In terms of American art, a lot of times it's viewed as stuff from the 20s and 30s, which had to do a lot with social activism, had to do a lot with certainly the Depression and such. So anytime, as a visual artist and as a painter of figures, it's almost impossible to, I think, or separate that image from any kind of thought about socialism or social activism or race or color or gender. I just think it's very, very difficult. And I find that all the time because they're always comparing it to other things within art history. And so they're comparing it to Thomas Hart Benton, or they're comparing it to somebody like the famous African-American artist, the guy, I can't think of his name right now, but that's what it's always been associated in terms of what I do. So I just think it's very, very difficult for it not to be social. Anytime you do a figure, anytime you do something that's realistic, or a place that actually exists, any kind of realism to me is social activism.
So now I'm going to delve a little bit into the elephant in the room. It's a whole circus in here. And this is just a little bit about Defend Our Hoods, the organization that was, upset about these talks for their own reasons. But this was something I thought was interesting on one of their Facebook posts. Speaking about the collusion between salon artists, nonprofits, and gentrifier developers, a slap in the face to tenants, in this case, Ballpark and Town Lake Apartments, and all working class residents on Riverside. While the developers are attempting to rezone apartments to tear down and build luxury development, cutting deals with gentrifiers. The Arts District offers nothing to the working class, Chicano, Black, and immigrant communities who live in Riverside area. So in terms of that, they're also, basically calling out the artists specifically for, being complicit. What things do you think that like a city like Austin could do to mitigate some of these issues in terms of supporting artists, creating culture or supporting culture, but at the same time not damaging pre-existing communities? Or is there anything that a city could do?
I mean, the culture and the art is already there, so that's where they could start. You know what I mean? Again, going back to what I said earlier, it's just this complete erasure of the people who were there in every type of way. The artists, the musicians, the business owners, the community in general. There's an erasure from every aspect. And developers will promote certain areas as oh, this new neighborhood, or oh, this new cultural arts district, or oh, this new this, and that's from where everything is framed. It's never, no one is ever really supporting the work that is already happening. And personally, that's why I feel like if it wasn't for organizations like Six Square, actually Six Square, that was the first biggest like exhibition I ever did was at Six Square. You know, so if it wasn't for organizations like Six Square, the Carver Museum, and other places around East Austin that were really uplifting and putting Black and brown artists at the forefront, then a lot of us would probably get, you know what I mean? Just swept underneath the rug in the name of this new face of, you know, oh, this cultural arts district or whatever, you know, not cultural arts, but what do they call it? Well, the art districts.
Yeah. And I mean, everything is about intentionality, right? And when we were, my first year, when we were deciding with the board of directors what were going to be our priorities, what were going to be our known fors, and I had heard about the art exhibits, and I'm glad to know that you had shown, and I thought you had shown at Six Square, but I wasn't sure, so that was prior to me coming. I was like, why hasn't she shown at Six Square? But it's like, it was years back, okay, so it didn't make the bio, but I will say this, you guys, the artists that I wanted to, so my goal is, one of the things that I wanted to Six Square to be known for is providing space for emerging artists and established artists. And we've had both established artists, and right now we're showcasing Donna Coro and Adrian Armstrong. Don just had a piece purchased. And it's just under $2,000. I'm sure Don ain't mad, right? And so that is a platform, but if we don't provide spaces for them to be shown, they're gonna be left out like everybody else. But I think in Texas or in Austin, I don't know if it's illegal in Texas or not, so I don't know, maybe someone from the city might know, but there needs to be negotiation for community benefits packages for nonprofits and for the community to help working class people. And someone told me, and I get relationships, someone said, Nefertitti, it's all about relationships. Well, if you're not in these circles where these things happen and you don't know these people, and oftentimes communities of color, because you don't have the financial resources, you don't even know who the people are, let alone have a relationship with them. So how do you get a relationship with the developers? And I'm seeing space popping up, 20,000 square foot. There is not one Black arts organization in Austin that has its own space. One, the Carver is a city-owned facility. No dance facilities, theater groups. Six Square is renting, our rent goes up. It's gone up twice since I've been there. Thank God it's under market rate, right? And so there has to be an intervention. If the city cares and values diversity, then there has to be and I will say this, I appreciate the contract we do have with the city. And some people say, you need to stop criticizing the city. And I'm like, I'm talking about overall, and I'm not talking about individual people, but I'm talking about where do we place our priorities and our values? How do we set things up for long term for working class people? And I think even us as a cultural arts institution, and I've been sharing this with other people, I do want to shift our priorities so that we are engaging whatever the common person is, because I feel common and I don't know what that means anymore, but I do know what that means. But we need to do a better job of engaging various aspects of our community. So that people can, number one, I had an idea earlier, and I'm going to be quiet. Dornice, because I was here what the two of you said, we need to invite schools or school-age children, and that's going to be I'm not saying that's not Shay's job. I'm saying this is what Nefertiti will take on for Six Square, inviting school-age children during Ease so that they can be exposed to art exhibits and not be afraid. And I think part of that happens very early on. You know, so I think community benefits packages, among other things, for sure.
Definitely. And then on the other side of that, what do you think artists, I mean, besides not supporting developments and whatnot that take away from these communities, what could they offer? What can they offer communities?
Artists can offer many different things. I mean, artists can offer insight about culture, they can offer insight about space, about their environment, the landscape that people don't typically take time to notice or to point out because of their jobs. I think they're just some of the basic things. I think, you know, artists that are educated in art history and in art can always make connections between different cultures around the world with any kind of situation. If they truly study the history of art and the history of cultures, which have always been multicultural. There has been no great empire that was not multicultural. I think that's one of the big fallacies that's out there, or not fallacy, but things that people don't stress enough. I think that's significant, and not just within artists, but also amongst our leaders, amongst our educators, amongst our politicians, amongst our business economists. That's just always been the case in culture. Culture is multicultural just by nature. And so I think artists need to be aware of that. When I taught at Gloria for a number of years, and there was a great little saying somebody had written someplace that said, learn everything that you can about your own culture and then go out and learn about another culture. And I think it's a very good maxim to follow. That was one of the things that got me interested in art per se, was that it was, you know, from my exposure to art and the history of humanity, it involved many different cultures. In world history, if you think about the Fertile Crescent and all that came before that, and now we know even more about how that came about. I think it's a privilege to be an artist, but it's also a great responsibility in that and throughout my career as an educator, I've tried to erase the mystery of what it is to be an artist. I don't think it's a big mystery, but unfortunately, our culture allows it to become one more and more all the time. It's a mystery as to how they did that, and I don't think that we put enough emphasis on learning about how artists make what they make, and why they make what they make, and what it relates to, what it's inspired by, what it's meant to be. I wish there was more of that in the public realm, and I wish that more people that have access to the public realm and have bigger microphones than we do would stress that more and more all the time. It doesn't happen, you know. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was working as a visiting artist at St. Andrews Preparatory High School. You know, it's you can say, well, you know, for a wealthy school and nice part of town and everything, and it is. You know, but they're still hungry for the basics of art. You know, they're hungry for having an artist show them how to draw an apple or how to draw a pumpkin. And you would think, well, certainly, you know, being from a privileged background, that you would have somebody would have shown you how to do this. I come from a very non-privileged background, and somebody showed me how to do that when I was 10 years old. And that may be more of a statement as to the current condition of our educational systems and what are our priorities. And I think that has to be thought about more clearly. And those artists that do know about world culture, historians, I think they need to come to the forefront and say, look, these things develop for these reasons. It's not a mystery. You know, art is not rocket science by any means. There are very specific reasons, and I think we as artists need to be more articulate and be able to clarify that more for the general public. It's very disheartening to hear that somebody from a working class community said that the arts have nothing to offer them, because that's just quite the opposite. All the greatest artists in our country have come from working class situations. The ones that were real innovators and saw things that everybody saw, but they didn't want to place any emphasis on. So I agree with Nefertiti. I think, as arts organizations, we do, and we're the givers, and so we have to constantly keep giving, or else it's not going to come about.
Yeah, and I think part of that is education too. Like, these people don't know the value of the art and culture, and art is power, and that's why whenever one culture is at war with another, one of the first things they do is go into the museums and destroy the artwork, because it's power, it's education. It teaches you about their culture, it teaches you about humanity. They were gonna say.
I was just going to add that the art, one of the roles that the artist can serve is to give voice to those people who are not often heard of, right? So one of my favorite murals is this mural on the outside of the Carver Library. It is so complex, but if you study it, at first I was like, I didn't see that before, I didn't see that. But it's the history of the African American people here coming to as enslaved individuals. It's a powerful piece. So being able to tell, because often we can lose those histories and stories, but then it also, to me, public art, and not just murals, more than just murals, and we want to see more than just murals, and murals are very powerful, but it allows us the opportunity to both tell stories, and then for the more everybody engages with art from other cultures, the more you begin to have compassion and understanding for people, because the art can be the same as my engagement, not exactly the same, but an engagement with a person. You're engaging with another cultural group. And so I think that's one way. And one developer had reached out to us, and they wanted us to do a mural, and I didn't want to, but I'm sitting here thinking, man, that was a missed opportunity. But to be able to tell a story of some people, but we'll see, yes.
Can we have?
Sure, certainly, yeah, we have time. Yeah,
Where I am tonight, I would like to have you think for a moment about what I'm about to say. And it's not a matter of haves and have-nots, artist community being pitted against the persons who are facing unaffordability, etc. I want to pose a conversation. We as a community have power. And we're always looking to philanthropic organizations. We're always looking to the city for somebody to come up with a solution and provide a way out for ourselves. Why can't we provide a way starting tonight? 1929 was a time in which the city of Austin said you had to live here. 50 or 75 some years later, the community of Austin has revoked its ordinance saying you deliberately had to live here. And now they're uprooting you out of here without an ordinance by virtue of taxation. So what are you saying, Freddie? What I'm saying is, why not all of us come together? Instead of being in silos, the artists, the community, the affordability people, and say to the developers, you have encroached on us, you have made millions off of us, why don't we say to you, you need to give us back something? I'm back to 1960 because I marched in the Civil Rights March to the word reparation. I know we don't like that word, but we have to bring that word out of mothballs presented before us right now and say it's reparation time. I'm very uncomfortable. I'm 74 years of age. And I'm darn sick and tired of people calling me in the middle of the night, the middle of the day, saying to me, brother, when are you going to die so we can get your property? Now that's ridiculous. I'm tired of people saying, why don't you move on and get out of the way so that we can take your property? Now, wait a minute. You're talking about harassment here. That's harassment to me. And I'm very upset about it. I'm constantly being harassed out of my house. I have lived in that house for some 38 years, and I'm going to die from that house, so help me. And nobody's going to rule me out of that. So what I'm saying is, community, why can't we come together with a proposal? Get away from our silos. We can say to the developers and then go to the city council or whoever the powers be in Austin and say, we have a plan. What is the plan, Freddie? The plan is that we can develop some type of consortium asking for some type of building, definitely here in East Austin, that represents the best that we have, where we then have small little buildings and a combined building where we have buildings for the arts community, the dance community, the literary community, etc. And we can have a nice facility, because it will start with funding from the developers who are coming in here and reaping benefit and not giving anything back to the community. Do you hear what I'm saying? So why don't we do something? Why do we sit here helpless? There's no reason for us to be helpless here. When people at the house next door to me, I've been there, like I said, some 38, almost 40 years. Now listen to this. All these years, my taxes have been very low because the white community wanted to keep it very low because they had rental property over here in Austin and they didn't want to pay high taxes on the rental property for the mansion they had on the west side of town. Let's be honest. So all of a sudden, here I'm sitting one day, the lady who is 100 years old that lived next door to me, who worked for the school district for some 50 years almost, with a low salary, not able to repair her house, but she did the best that she could. Her grandchildren lived in with her, but they had no substantial income whatsoever. So when she passed away, they had to sell the house at a low cost, which they didn't really gain anything from. The developer who bought the house lived in Canada. He came down several times to look at the property that he acquired. The lady built the house in the early 60s for something like between $25,000 and $35,000. The developer put about $100,000 or so in the house. He sold it. I'm sitting next door. My property's alone. City kept it that way. And all of a sudden, when I check out the cost and the sale of the house next door, $565,000. That's what I'm living next door to. Do you understand now what my property is? And people are calling me, and they're wanting me to sell, and I get very honored. The last call I got was last Friday afternoon, and the man calls me, and he says to me, Freddie, I said, wait a minute, brother, you don't know me. Give me my respect. If you're going to want me to sell my house, say, Mr. Dixon, do you need some manners? I said that to him. I said, you don't do that to me. At least respect me, sir. He then says, well, I want to buy your house. I said, oh, you do? I said, well, let's have a conversation. He said, yes, we can. But I just want to, I said, wait, just, oh, you go either way. Let me set the conversation, and then we can stop. I said, the conversation starts and 1,300,000. I got the same kind of answer I'm getting from your faces. The phone clicked. Do you understand? I just represent legions of other folk, regardless of their color, who live here in East Austin, who can't speak for themselves, ladies and gentlemen. Do you understand the predicament we're in? It's not a matter of either or. It's a matter of all of us. The proposal I'm saying tonight, let's go after the people we need to go after. The developers. The gates are open. The market is there. We basically can't control the market because people are going to sell their houses because they have to. But what we can control are the developers who are taking advantage of this. And we can say to them, which I'm going to push, and I'm asking you to join in with us tonight. I'm going to push the fact that there needs to be a give back. It's not all a take back, but it's a give back. A give back to people who have been living on this east side with low incomes, no jobs, no future, no anything. And here we are now, being forced out of what little bit of whatever self-esteem, what little bit of history we had. And we're being forced out. And we're not having any say-so about our being forced. And I'm saying the pushback needs to come from the community saying to the developers, hold it, fellas. Hold it, ladies. Yours. You can't keep coming in. Now I'm putting that on the table. That's for the artist community. We're talking about space. Let's go get the space. Nothing comes up to you and says, here's some space. You didn't get your mate, you didn't get your boyfriend. Somewhere there was a mutuality where you both walked up and said hello. I think that's the way it happened, hello. And whether you said hello or not determined whether or not you went further, but I think if you said hello right, there was a relationship. And yes, Miss Jackmon was right. I was with her daddy. Everything starts with a relationship. So we need to first of all say what our intentions are as a community. I didn't mean to take up the time, but my time is running out for me right now. I got more time than I have in front of me, but whatever's in front of me, I'm going to take advantage. Let's go after the people we need to go after. The developers. We've been down that street before. We fought with the salamander, didn't we? Saved a life. Why can't we fight for our own life? Why can't we fight for our space? Why can't we fight for us to be together? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we can't top that. And I think our time is up anyway. Yes, we are. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our audience, especially to the gentleman for your input. I really appreciate that. Obviously, this is, a conversation we still have to continue, and, there's so much to be done. So, do we have any more question?
I have a question.
Yes.
So the program that was scheduled for Tuesday night, I was told that it might be rescheduled. Is that true?
Yes. Yes. Do you want to?
Yes, it's been postponed, and we're going to meet soon, Big Medium and the Carver, and we will all meet together to come up with a new date for that. And
but is it possible that we can at least take one or two more questions?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All that has been said, I mean, we need to have just a little bit of...
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I thought we were over time. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I just wanted to say, even though I'm a white woman, that I grew up in San Francisco, came to Austin in the mid-'80s, and moved to East Austin, where the prices were really low, right? And several years ago, I joined the board of Women in Their Work. It was started by Rita Starr Pattern, who was an activist woman because 95% of the artists displayed were men. And so Women in the Work still is the only women's art gallery in America. But what I've noticed as a lifelong feminist, and I've noticed tonight people trying to be real delicate, bringing up this, you can't do that. Like there anybody who feels left out, who feels underrepresented. I mean, I've been there where you try to be nice because you think they're going to think you're angry. You're angry. Like you're angry and you have right to be angry, so you just got to be angry. I mean, you know, it's like people who have everything they want and all the access, they're not angry because they got all the laws, you know. And so I'm just so glad you said everything you said, because I think that if you try to get people to not like you know what I'm saying, to approve of you because they're going to think that you're an activist or you're whatever, you just got to claim the space of who you are. And so I really...
This passion is, Reverend Dixon works with me. Sometimes he has to pat my leg. You know, I hear you, but then that also comes from a space of privilege too.
Yes.
And I've been criticized a lot by people from
Yes.
people, why are you criticizing the city? That's where your funding comes from. You can't say this information, this is a city exhibit, you gotta take this out, that out. And so there is a dance. I wish there was not a dance. There is a dance.
But yeah, you're right. That's what I'm a white woman.
Yeah, we need to keep the Black cultural organizations around.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I think that just like what you're saying, to raise the, you know, to go raise the money for the Black space, because you're not going to get it by being nice.
We need y'all to be loud.
Yeah.
Yes.
All of it.
It's really loud.
Thank you all so much for having this event. It was amazing. My name is Nakshi. I am from Houston as well. I came here because of the university, and then I stayed in the city. After I graduated, all I could think about was gentrification and how I'm also playing a role in that. But what I thought about a lot of stuff that y'all said, and I don't really know what to question. It's more like these were my thoughts. First thing I thought about were the role of murals that they play now and that they have been playing, like what Cindy was saying. There have been waves of gentrification in Austin. This is just not the first, and it won't be the last for sure. But like murals, from what I've seen, are definitely a site of cultural and political statements. They're also a site of like marketing in a lot of ways, and like Austin has kind of created a tourist vibe around the murals, and right, I feel like franchising businesses create murals so that people could come and patronize their establishments. So there's like a double thing with murals, and I feel like it's really difficult to know what exactly you're creating. Are you creating a force of gentrification, or are you creating a force of cultural history, all of that, politicization of the space? And the second thing I think about is how a lot of activists, and this is difficult to say, but a lot of activists and artists and all these folks who are now here were gentrifying Austin at the time and are gentrifying Austin. And how can you create a space together? Because it feels like, driving through East Austin, it feels like two universes have smashed together, and one house looks like it's been there for years. Another house looks like it's from the future, and it's are those people talking to each other? What are the community spaces looking like, right? Are they creating art together? I don't think so. And so, those are the kind of things I think about all the time, and also the co-opting of streets, co-opting of Tillery, co-opting of Chicon, co-opting of these really Latinas, and
Cesar
Chavez, co-opting of Mary Street, Ann Street, which Cindy told me were names of Black women, in the South First District. And how artists and collectives co-opt those names, and they're predominantly white and not from here. Wheatsville. So those are some thoughts I had, and like those are just some thoughts. Sorry, I didn't mean to like vomit all of it. But I think about that a lot, and it's like it's a difficult conversation. But I also think that it's a lot of performing as well. Like as artists, they perform that they are forward-thinking and activist and progressive, but they're also doing a lot of damage to the community. It's hard.
Yes, sir.
I have a question. It's not against what you said, but it's kind of adding a different viewpoint to what you just said. If I was driving on the street and I get pulled over, and the cop said, "Hey, you just broke this law," and I said, "Oops, I didn't know." I don't get a pass. So,
What would you say? If you didn't know
I broke the law.
Right.
Then I don't get a pass. Ignorance is not an excuse of the law. So I just thought about it when you mentioned they don't want to know, so that they're not held accountable. So
You don't have a responsibility, but you can't be. It's almost like, well, I can't be held accountable, but it doesn't mean that there are not serious consequences. For, as Veronica found out, right, with the mural on 12th and Chacon, but then, but we were able to turn it into a learning.
right, and that's the point I want to make. I think we have to find the language that do not just accept that, look, we're part of this community, so treat us as if this is our community also. I just wanted to kind of get that over there. I didn't want the room to leave feeling well, they're just getting a pass because they don't want to know they don't know, so excuse me. My other point I was going to make is I heard that there were a lot of murals and stuff in the city. It's a good thing. What we don't know is that the city spends a lot of money on what they're doing. For me, my experience in trying to get Black artists engaged in that is still a learning process, and it's not an easy one. Both for the artists and me who are not artists, I'm just trying to create space for ourselves. So I think another conversation needs to be had as the public part of this. Or even I think we were just speaking like if we were entrepreneurs and we're trying to do something. But I think the city really has an obligation to fix in some of the defects in the problem. And that might be a longer conversation. I know it is, and I'm saying it because I know people from the city sitting here, right?
And we appreciate her as well.
Yes, we do. yes, we do. But there are other serious conversations that need to be had, not just about us as a community trying to follow ourselves up, but what are the responsibilities of the city and other stakeholders also. When I say other stakeholders, I mean our white partners in creating an environment that provides for us to succeed and grow.
I wanted to ask just each of the panel members for concrete tactics or maybe like 2 or 3 things that artists can do to actually materially work for change. Artists and maybe curators as well, if you wanted to bring that in, and like building community agency and collective power and resiliency, things of that nature. What are like 2 or 3 things that people can do right now?
Right. Thank you. There's actually something I didn't get to during our conversation, but this was from an article on hyperallergic, and it's about artists' guide to not being complicit with gentrification. And as some of the things we already discussed, so becoming involved in housing struggles, especially if you were part of the more desirable, quote, gentrifying class, that's something that's very crucial. As artists, educating yourselves, especially considering that we might have racial, educational, or class privileges compared to our neighbors. It's imperative to understand the need to find other ways of dealing with conflict and safety issues besides calling the police, given who the police serve and who the police jail and kill with impunity. As artists who participate in and support exhibitions, we must interrogate the spaces we choose to enter and work with. I think that one's really important. And then we must choose between prioritizing our own individualistic artistic careers or prioritizing the dismantling of oppressive structures. So, kind of intangible things, but some are very concrete that you can, and it doesn't have to be as artists. It can be something that everybody can learn from, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I like all of those points. And as far as curators go, I would add curating shows that feature Black and brown artists and artists from their community. Finding those artists, paying attention, doing your research on the geography of the space that you and your galleries are occupying, and kind of, just building community with the artists who are already there, because there are a lot of galleries, especially on Cesar Chavez, who bring in folks who, from everywhere but Austin, and the street that, being on Cesar Chavez, it's like, okay, this street has a lot of history. This community has a lot of history. Where are the representations of the artists from this community? Where are the calls for artists from this community? Where is that work happening? Because I don't really see that, happening a lot. And a lot of these spaces market themselves as like progressive, liberal, all of these things, and yet the same systems are being created within those spaces where we're still not seeing Black and brown artists, we're still not seeing the community. The community is being completely erased just by you not welcoming the presence of that community in that space. So I think that's a huge thing that curators should be working towards, is how to build those relationships with actual members from the communities whose neighborhoods that our spaces are occupying. There needs to be more efforts towards that.
Could you restate your question? What you're interested in? What artists can do to be resilient or to make social change? Is that the main part of your question?
Build community, resistance, resilience, and to just change, work against gentrification right now in concrete ways.
Well, I think first of all, I think your main obligation is to be an artist primarily, and to be able to share that with as many people as possible. I think that's that would be my primary goal as an artist, is to know what my work is about and how to talk about it and how to present it to anybody and everybody. As far as specifically about gentrification, that's a matter, I think, largely of the economic system in the city of Austin and the taxation system of the county itself. If there really was that interest of maintaining people where they grew up, and then something could have been done 20 years ago, but nothing did happen. And so that's consequently the people that are in the situation they're in today, or for that reason, aside from the historic reasons of segregation, the taking of land. I mean, I'm 70% Native American, so I think I can talk about that. Just the history of this country, in general. There's a lot of different things that are not discussed, or they are discussed, but they're not discussed entirely and wholly, and they're certainly not discussed holistically. In my point of view, you get snippet here, a little piece there, and you can't rely on television for all these things. And that's why I do what I do, is because growing up, I didn't watch television until I was 7 or 8 years old, but it became pretty clear that stories about my experience were certainly not on television. They certainly were not in the comic books. They're certainly not even in art, contemporary art. so as an artist, that was the role that I foresaw for myself is being able to relate these different things of my own personal history, my own family's history in this country, and to do it visually. I can write about it just as well, and I have, but I think visually it has a stronger impact because just the fact that somebody took the time to make a painting about it, I think generates a lot of interest just because of the act of painting. I think that would be my preferred view of what I can do as a person and as an artist, is to serve the people that are going to be looking at the art, and to serve, which is everybody, which is to inform the public a little bit more about what is going on and what your work is about, and to question what the work is really about. Well, why are you really making this work? Why are you doing this work? Is it to sell? Is it to impress an art dealer, a collector in New York City? Or is it to impress yourself? Or is it to convey some information that maybe would otherwise not be conveyed to the public? What is it exactly that you want to do with your work? Do you want to make cute designs and have wallpaper sold around the world? What is it that you want to do? All those things are very valid. I think that's the beauty of art, is there's so many different things that can be done with art, depending on the person and what they actually want to do. If you want to become involved in politics, that's great. That's a whole other world. And art does have a role to play in politics, if you let them, and if you invite them. And that's another aspect. I mean, a lot of times I don't like my works to be associated with certain things, but I have no choice because it's out in the public realm. There was somebody touching on the idea of the popularity of murals in the last 15 years or so being done commercially in Austin. I mean, there's a website that says, oh, Fidencio Duran has a mural, at the ABIA, blah, blah, blah. And so therefore, wouldn't you like to have a mural in your bedroom? And it goes over to these other people that they do paintings. I mean, they do decorative paintings and all this and that, which is fine. But, they kind of take it out of context, but that's okay. At least there's an interest in painting and in art, in those kinds of ways. So I'm not too, I can see how it would happen, and it always will happen, as far as cultural appropriation happens all the time. I mean, we all do it. We've all done it in the past. We'll continue to do it. But I think the difference is the way that it's done, and unfortunately, what some people are touching on is just the manner in which gentrification has been taking place by certain individuals and certain people, and I can relate to that. Nobody likes to be. Everybody wants to know their neighbors. I do. I like to know who they are and what they do, and I like to think that we have the same image of what our neighborhood will be and what's good about it and what we should preserve and emphasize. And unfortunately, what I'm hearing from this audience and from other audiences is that the people that are coming in and building or living here are really not doing that. They're not taking those steps to get to know the people that they're living next door to. Just the fact that, I couldn't imagine having a neighbor, and hopefully it doesn't happen, but it could someday, to have a neighbor move in next door and build right to the edge of the property and build a wall around everything so I can't see what they're doing. I wouldn't trust it. I don't trust people that do that.
That's happening.
And it's happening.
It's happening.
And this is at a very personal level, and I think that is the real crux of the issue, is how you deal with a person to person. Now, if this person makes an effort to get to know me, vice versa, which I always do, and somehow we find a common ground. But if somebody just comes in and says, okay, I'm richer than you are, I own this now, I can do whatever I want,
Correct.
Which is true. Yeah, you can do whatever you want, but as artists, we think of this all the time. How is this going to be perceived? How is this going to be viewed? How is my image going to be perceived by everybody? And it's something that, as an artist, you have to consider, and I don't see that happening enough. And I'm not going to lay the onus on a whole group of people, because that's not the case. That's never the case. My father left Mexico when he was 4 years old during the middle of the Mexican Revolution to get away from his own people, because they couldn't manage to keep the peace. And so I have a great history of of being displaced. My father was displaced because of the Mexican Revolution. When I was 5 or 6 years old, I was displaced because my father got sick and couldn't work, so therefore we had to move. And that was, that was my experience up until I was 15 years old, or 13 years old. So I understand displacement. I understand being uprooted and say, well, we have to move, or not even having a choice in that. It's happening all the time all over the world. But I think in this country, as privileged as this country is, as much wealth and education, the depth of education that's available in this country, all the things that this country's been through, and yet we still don't seem to learn the fact that the most important thing is the person-to-person interaction. And unfortunately, those people that are doing these things are not in this room, and they wouldn't be in this room. Like I say, they don't care to be in this room. And so you just have to deal with it. I mean, you're going to have to deal with that. Unfortunately, we all have to deal with it. And it's getting, I don't say it's getting worse and worse, but there's something that's going on because we don't interact with each other the way we used to. People don't care. They look at the way people drive on in roads that are 35 miles an hour. They're going 60 miles an hour. They don't care. I think that's the real issue that we all have, about not caring about our neighbor, not caring about the person that's driving around us, not thinking that it matters, whether or not you make a stop sign, it matters. Whether or not you say good morning, whether or not say hello or how are you, those things matter. And as visual artists, we typically don't speak that much, but I've never been that way. I've always been very verbal. In fact, I was a writer before I was a painter. So I think we need to do that. And as artists, we need to we need to be good cultural ambassadors to what is the best of our culture. What are the best things about the American culture? Why are we here? Why do we love this country? All these problems that we have, why are we still here? Why are we still trying to find the answers to these things? I think as artists, we can be good citizens. I think that's the most important thing.
As the manager of the building, I have just kept my mouth shut, and it is impossible for me to hold my peace. So I would like to close with just a few words. First, get a catalog. They're on the back counter. But the question that has been raised 2 or 3 different times in 2 or 3 different ways is, what can the city do? We know that whether art is created in the aesthetic language of social realism, abstract expressionism, or even some postmodernist expressive approaches, we know that fine art is often inspired by the folk behavior, folk culture. The songs that I heard when I was a kid, from gospel to jazz, the stories that I heard my grandparents speak about, the quilts that my great aunt and my grandmother made, the gardens that they created, the photographs that they took with those little cameras that were not necessarily professional cameras, that was all visual imagery to me. It was art. What can the city do? I came from a group of landowners, and there were a group of landowners right in this community. And so some would say that strangers have moved in, and some would say now those persons are strangers. What the city can do is to promote the landowner, help those who are landowners here. There was a discussion about developers. You know, often people die intestate, and when they do so, it goes to the descendants. We once called that family land, and which emphasized the importance of the group. We have now learned to call that heirs property, which focuses on the individual rights and partition sales and all of that. And this is where, in part, developers come in. What can the city do? it can support landowners. And if it supports landowners, it supports families. And if it supports families, it supports the art that have come out of those families and the strength of a community that can see itself in art, whether folk art or fine art. And so I say the city does indeed have a role to play. And that is to help communities stay intact, help communities grow and develop. And so I want to thank every panelist for coming and participating tonight. We're going to look for an engaging discussion when we reschedule this discussion, because maybe, with a focus on those who were the landed persons in this community or in various communities, maybe we can move the discussion from gentrification to revitalization, and that a role and the power that a community has to revitalize itself and its community. Thank you so very much.